In this tutorial, we'll investigate the setup and use of Invent's advanced grouping features. These features allow you to align, resize, and space grouped items with precision, offering enhanced layout control and dynamic content-based resizing for a streamlined design process. Firstly, we'll take a look at how to configure these advanced groups. Then we'll take a look at some examples of them in action, and this will be in slightly later tutorials to better understand how these can be effectively configured. So these features work by utilizing InDesign's grouping feature for fields. These groups can be enabled inside Invent, ensuring Invent considers them to be dynamic fields, and then this opens up additional configuration options. So in our example that we've got on screen here, we've got 4 fields. This consists of 2 text fields. We've got 1 populated image field with an image in place, and then we've got 1 placeholder image field as well. The placeholder image frame is optional and will be used to define the boundary of the group in greater detail than simply relying on the boundary created when grouping the main fields. So for example, just to show you what I mean, if I multi-select those 3 frames and then group those together, you'll see our boundary is just the extent of those frames. What I can do is utilize this boundary frame that we've created here, which is just an empty image frame, to actually extend the boundary of the entire group. If using an image frame as a boundary, it's essential that it is empty. Invent will not recognize it as a possible boundary field if it is not an empty image frame. Okay, so I'm going to start off by moving our boundary frame into position. So I'm just going to move it behind the rest of my fields. And our next job is to ensure that all of these fields are enabled inside Infigo Invent. Enabling them ensures that Invent sees the fields as variable. And this is also a requirement should you wish to enable the entire group of fields inside Invent as well. So this is just normal Invent 101. So if I go ahead and select each of those fields individually, I can go ahead and enable them. And then we could go ahead and just do some additional things to that field as we normally would in Invent. In this case, I'm just going to make sure that they're all enabled. You'll notice that for image frames, we don't just get the ability to enable or disable them, we get the ability to choose whether it's static, so therefore it's not considered enabled, whether it's an image box, or whether we're expecting a barcode. So I'm just going to switch to image. And then the same with what we're considering to be our boundary frame. Now we want to go ahead and create the group if we haven't already. We'll create our group of fields in InDesign. So we've made sure we've positioned the fields. We're going to select them all. And that includes the boundary field. Right click and then click on group. It's highly recommended that you rename the group in the layers tab within InDesign. So what you'll see is if I've got this group we've just created selected and go to my properties tab, it's just given an ID number, which isn't really very useful to us. And you might get the same or similar problems with the individual fields themselves. So we recommend going to the Layers tab within InDesign and renaming the group and maybe the individual fields. And what you'll see is if I go back to Invent, that group has now been renamed. So with the group selected, I'm going to actually enable that group within the Properties tab of Infigo Invent. With the group still selected, we're going to navigate down to these advanced options. Now, many other options are available within the group and are covered in other tutorials within the Infigo Academy. So in terms of the advanced options, adjustments can be made horizontally, vertically, or both. Now, these options allow you to specifically control which margins and which size parameters, so height and width, are controlled using this functionality. In our example, we're going to stick to adjust horizontally, as all of our grouped fields are in a horizontal configuration with one another. Now, as I mentioned before, a boundary is not required. You can just use the general group boundary. But if you want to identify one of your fields as a boundary, you can do so from this list here. It will only show empty image fields. And as soon as you select a boundary, the corresponding options further down this page will become unavailable because it's now recognizing that as a boundary that you're not going to want to do any additional modification on. It also means that when you take it over to Mega Edit, it's not going to consider that to be a modifiable field for your end users. Now, moving down a little bit, Infigo provide a few default size and positioning options for the group. These will automatically modify the settings of each individual field contained within the group, the options of which can be seen in the sections below. Now, these are provided as just some default common options, either to utilize or to serve as a starting point for your own positioning and sizing rules. And we'll investigate these options individually in a later tutorial. Now, each field within the group has a section on this page. If you click on Advanced Settings on one of those particular fields, you can see and control the margins and the size behavior of this field relative to other fields or the boundaries that are surrounding it. It's worth noting as well that if the system hasn't picked the fields up in the correct order, you can change the order on this page. Further up the list gives them higher priority. Depending on the advanced options selected, such as horizontal or vertical, you will see different options displayed within here controlling different margins and different size parameters of that field. Now, in our example, where we have horizontal selected, we have inputs for control of the left or right margin, along with the width value of the field itself. And of course, if you had vertical selected, you might see top and bottom, and then the height size. Now, the margin input allows you to control the spacing between this field and whatever is to the left or the right of it. This could be another field, or it could be the boundary. There's going to be a separate tutorial which goes through how exactly this works in a bit more detail. There are also multiple ways in which we can specify the value or behavior of these margins. In addition, we can directly control the width of our field. Again, we can do this in multiple ways. So let's look at changing the behavior of these particular margins or size. We can do this by clicking on this drop-down list here. So this specifically is for the left margin of our left text field. So this margin here. And you can see we've got options for self, value, or auto. So the self option, so this means the margin, relative position, or size will not be changed by the algorithm from the field's current value. If we select value here, that's the direct specification of the margin or the size parameter, and this will override the field's current position if you require it to do so. We have auto, so the margins or the field size will automatically calculate to fit the space within the group. This is a weighted value, allowing you to provide priority to certain spaces. And then if we come to the size parameter there, you'll see that we have a content option. So this allows us to control the size of a field based on the content within it. And this can be applied to both text and image fields. Now again, we'll have a later tutorial which goes through some of these options in a bit more detail to hopefully clarify how each one of those works. One final note when configuring this set of options here, we do need to make sure that the individual text field size constraints are changed from fixed in order to be able to change the size of the box. So if I change that from fixed to the relevant setting, so for this example, it could just be horizontal. That will allow us to resize the field.